Welcome to the channel. When darkness falls, some doors never truly close. Tonight, in 3 true horror stories, you'll hear her of unknown calls, empty apartments that aren't empty, and shadow trapped behind glass. Put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and stay with us until the very end.
I want you to turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and join me in the dark. If you enjoy these true horror stories, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with us until the very end, because sometimes the scariest part is the last thing you hear. I worked the overnight shift as a 911 call taker in a Midwestern county, where the radio chatter is mostly fender benders and dog complaints until about 2 a.m., when the real calls come in like a cold tide. The consoles hum, the fluorescent lights flatten your face, and you live on burnt coffee and the way your headset cord coils like a sleeping snake on your desk. The first odd thing that night was small. My clock ticked over to 3:11 and froze. For a breath, the second hand trembling like it hit a bubble in the glass. I tapped it without thinking, and the second hand hopped forward. The second odd thing came exactly 20 minutes later when a call came in with no caller ID. Just the word unknown, which usually means a blocked number or a cell tower doing what cell towers do. I answered with my script, 911, what is your emergency? And heard the kind of silence that isn't really silent, a sound like a hallway stretching away from me. Then a woman's voice cut in, tight and thin with adrenaline, and it was mine. I didn't recognize it as mine at first, only as familiar. A voice I knew from recordings or those awkward times you hear yourself on a voicemail. The caller said, "There's someone in my house. Closet door is half open. Footsteps 5 minutes ago. I think he's still here. Please, please, don't hang up." I ran the usual tree of questions out of habit. Address. Is the intruder known? Does the caller have a weapon? Are there children in the home? Answered those questions with the caller because answering them kept me from admitting that the address she gave was mine. She recited my street name and the corner with the buckled sidewalk where the maples heave up the concrete every spring. And when she reached my apartment number, the connection scratched like a cat in a wall, and the line filled with a low whisper that could have been wind, could have been a man's breath. My supervisor, a woman named Cole who wears the quiet like a badge, saw my face blanch and slid over to listen on the second set. She mouthed, "Keep her talking," not seeing that my hands were shaking so hard I could hear the headset plastic creak. I told the caller, that is, myself, to lock the bedroom door if she could and stay on the line while we sent units. I sent them, then I made the mistake of asking what she could see under the door, which is one of the questions you never ask if the caller is barely holding it together. Because what she could see was what I could see in my mind, the thin black seam at the bottom of that old door and the way light from the living room made a pale stripe on the floorboards. She said she could see a pair of shoes, one toe angled a little inward the way some people stand when they rest. She described the scuffs, the laces tucked sloppily down the sides, one lace with a wet-looking dark patch near the tip. I knew my door frame had a notch where the old bolt plates used to be, and while she whispered I heard the tiniest sound, a soft leaf whistle noise, and pictured a hand testing that notch with a fingernail. I sent the units again, urgent, and marked the call home invasion with caller in bedroom, door locked, intruder unknown. I kept thinking that I had not been home when I came to work, that my apartment should be empty, but the thought kept off-gassing, panic like a cheap heater all the same. Asterisk, asterisk, the officers rolled up. I heard their chatter on the radio. That forced looseness they get when they're actually tight. Setting a perimeter. Checking the back stairwell. Second unit at the front. I held the caller's breath steady with mine. We counted breaths together, which is something they tell you not to do because it leads you. It ties you to your caller's fate. I could hear the thuds as the officers went up the stairs. 2, 3, 4. And I could hear something else layered under, a scrape, the same pitch as a drawer being eased open. My bedroom closet doesn't have a sliding door. It has a cheap bifold that never sits quite flush, and the scrape sounded like that hinge running a dry groove in the paint. The officers knocked and announced and used the key the landlord gave them last year after a welfare check on a different tenant. The latch caught and then let go. Cole squeezed my wrist under the desk. I heard a short, surprised exhale over the phone, like the caller saw a shape stand and then fold into the dark. And then the radio lit up with the kind of flat speed only cops can do. Front room clear, kitchen clear, bedroom door locked, bedroom door locked. Myself whispered, "He's in here with me," and then a sound like a palm pressing once against the door, as if the man inside wanted to leave a print of his animal curiosity. The officers asked me, the dispatcher, if they had permission to breach. I said yes. The battering bar hit wood, and the call cut to a roaring white hiss. Then came back with the small rapid sounds of my closet door flaps rattling like someone inside was trying not to breathe. The officers shouted commands, voices high, like they're not in their throats where they belong, but in an attic where it gets thin. Then, hands, hands. Then, show me your hands. Then nothing, only the officer's heavy breath and a shape of furniture being shoved aside, and then the words, "Closet empty," which didn't make sense because the caller had said he was there, because the closet had not been empty when the shoes had been visible. Because empty is a word that can mean nothing and also can mean something that is there you can't see. The caller's line didn't drop. I heard crying and the muffled, embarrassed laugh I do when adrenaline cracks like a glow stick. That little brittle giggle you can't stop. And then I heard the one detail that still tightens every muscle. Along my spine, one of the officers said there was no phone in the bedroom. He said it casually, like, looks like you called from your cell. But the caller me said she had been using the landline because her cell was charging on. The kitchen counter and the base on the nightstand was old but reliable. The one with the cracked plastic and the little green screen. I have that phone. I had left it unplugged in a box in my closet when I moved, meaning there was no landline to call from at all. They found no intruder, no footprints on the balcony where the paint would show. Nothing disturbed except the bedroom doorframe notched a little deeper, as if a nail had worried at it. They cleared my apartment and said I could return home after my shift if I wanted someone to swing by with me. I got off at 8 and drove home on streets that looked slightly off, like someone had taken the map and sharpened the angles a bit. The landline base on the nightstand sat where it always had in my memory, but it looked wrong in the present, a prop from another life. The officers had left their business card and a note. The closet was closed. I opened it slowly and smelled the faint mineral smell of coal dust and paint scuffs. And in the back of the space, a cardboard box bulged where something heavy had been set on it and then removed, leaving the cardboard bowed. On the closet floor, I found a shoelace tipped up, stiff, sticky with something brown and old that cracked when I pressed it with my nail. My cell phone call history for 3:31 showed no outgoing calls, only the incoming unknown that connected for 14 minutes. I played the voicemail on myself from work, the recording of my own voice reading the call log and instructions for the officers. And underneath my own words, I heard a whisper that wasn't me, but was so close to me, it felt like a mirror breathing. Sometimes I still wake up at 3:11 and look at the door and see the black seam at the bottom of it, brightening with the light in the living room, and I count breaths I can't hear. I'll tell you the next one while it sits in that seam with us. I used to take cheap gigs, photographing apartments for a property manager in a Rust Belt city that had more available units than people who wanted them. Most days it was dead plants on balconies and carpets that remembered too much. But one weekend he texted me an address with "today, if possible, rent ready, key in lockbox." The building was a 12-story rectangle from the 1960s with a lobby that smelled like old steam and a mail area with metal boxes, all the keyholes bright from 1,000 hands. The elevator stamped its way up, every floor a little groan, and I folded my tripod in my arms like a spare rib. Unit 1204 sat at the end of a long white hallway with a window that looked over the river and the skeletons of mills. The door was already ajar when I got there. I called "hello" and pushed it with my foot. Fresh paint stung my nose, and the floors were that fake wood that always photographs a little to orange. A radio somewhere in the unit was on low, one of those tinny talk stations that make every voice sound like it knows a secret. I called again and got nothing but the radio's murmur. The manager had said it was vacant. The bathroom fan was running. I set my tripod and started shooting the living room, clicking through the wide shots, tight shots, closet shots, but the radio under the sound kept catching words like hooks: stayed, sorry, kept, please, in a woman's voice that the AM station reshaped into a steady saw, asterisk, asterisk. I found the radio in the kitchen, sitting on the laminate counter beside a white ceramic mug with a lipstick print half-mooned on the rim. The mug was still wet inside when I tipped it, like whoever had drunk from it had only just set it down. And when I turned the radio off, the apartment took a breath, and then I heard something else you don't want to hear alone. That soft, irregular clink that could be a spoon settling in a cup or a small metal thing swaying somewhere. The property manager texted me, "all good," and I wrote "almost done," because I needed the money and because there's an arrogance to daylight that makes you think anything can be explained. If you write down the steps, the bedroom faced west. The window was a huge pane, the kind that rattles when a truck hits a pothole 2 blocks away. The closet had mirrored doors, and I hate them. The camera always catches me in them, small and gull-like, and I'd have to angle around so future tenants wouldn't see my ghost crouched in the photos. When I slid one panel, it wobbled on its track with that grainy rolling sound. Inside, a shelf, a clothing rod, 2 wire hangers with dry cleaner paper caps, and a third hanger shaped like something heavy had once hung on it long enough to put a permanent bend in the aluminum. On the closet floor, under where the hangers sat, there was a slightly darker patch of vinyl, not stain dark, more like shadow dark, a rectangle. I crouched and touched it, and it was cooler than the rest of the floor, as if someone had lifted a shallow box that had sat there for years. I took pictures because you take pictures of everything if you want to be paid. And while I did, my camera's viewfinder blinked as though a hand had passed in front of the lens. Not visible to my eye, only to the little right-angled world in the digital screen. I heard the bathroom fan cut out, and then, from behind the mirror doors, a slow drag like a finger running from one end of the rod to the other, snagging each hanger in turn. I slid the mirror panels closed too hard, and they slapped each other and sent a ripple through my reflection, which broke into two of me for a second, my face offset like a poorly printed photo. And when the glass settled, I saw another person, standing behind me at the farthest edge of the frame, just at the angle where the two mirrors meet. I spun so fast, I smacked my hip on the corner of the dresser that wasn't there half an hour ago, and caught myself with a hand on the wall. The room behind me was empty except for dust motes doing their slow galaxy. In the mirror, though, the person stayed. It was a woman in a faded blue t-shirt with a university I knew, hair up, jaw clenched hard enough that the muscles under her ears made tight little ropes. She didn't look at me. She looked toward the door the way deer look toward tree line. Then she stepped out of the mirror frame, which is impossible if the room has no one to step with, and the closet door rolled 1 inch on its track with a tiny click like a latch being teased. I didn't take photos for a minute. I just stood there and listened and heard it again, that irregular faint clink, and realized what it was. A teaspoon tied with cotton twine to the inside of the closet rod, so that when someone opened the closet, the spoon would tap the hanger and the person in the bedroom would know. The kind of trick you set when you need warning that a door's about to open. The kind of trick you don't need if the place you live is safe. I found the twine taped too, the back of the rod with cheap, translucent tape. The spoon had left a little soft nickel scar on the hanger. When I pulled the tape off, something sweet and faintly rotten moved in the closet air. And I had the sense, not the sight, the sense that I had exposed a hollow where a person had once been, the way you lift a rug and the square of clean floor is the shape of its absence. I put the twine back because the thought arrived complete. If I remove it, she can't warn herself. It landed in the middle of my brain with the same unreasonable certainty as a smell from childhood. The radio clicked itself back on. I don't mean I saw the dial turn or anything showy. It was just off, and then it was on. And the woman's sawtooth voice fuzzed back. You said you'd stop. And then the fan ran again, and the apartment's temperature turned itself up a notch, the way places do when the sun finds them. I finished the photos in a hurry, and on the way out, I noticed a small sticker near the peephole on the inside of the front door, about the size of a thumbnail, a heart and a number that looked like a date in faded ink. The door's inside knob had a scuff as though it had often been turned without being opened. 2 days later, the manager called me, which he almost never did, and asked if I had left anything in 1204. I told him no. He said a prospective tenant called to say the radio had been playing when she arrived, but the plug lay on the counter, not in the wall, and the bathroom fan was dead even if you flicked the switch. Maintenance said the fan's power line had been disconnected for a while. He made it a complaint about me having a key longer than necessary. But under it I heard fear because property guys get superstitious. I drove back at dusk with a friend because I told myself I was going to retrieve the twine before the new tenant found it, and pulled it with that specific horror you feel when you realize someone before you set up traps to know when someone comes. Through the door, the building's lobby felt like holding your breath. The elevator ticked up. The hallway to 1204 caught the light like a hospital corridor. When we reached the unit, the door was closed, lockbox gone. I knocked, and a woman in her 50s opened it, not suspicious so much as very tired of learning new layouts. I told her I had left something in the closet, and she said, I hope it wasn't her. She stepped aside. The radio sat on the counter, unplugged, its antenna bent more than before, like it had been repeatedly thumbed. The white mug had been washed and put upside down to dry, but left a faint round ghost on the counter. We went to the bedroom and slid. The mirror doors, the twine hung there in its little diagonal, knotted around the rod and taped in place. The new tenant watched my face change when the spoon tapped the hanger, tap, tap, gentle as a heartbeat. She said the property manager had told her that a previous tenant moved out in a hurry when a boyfriend wouldn't, and that police had come enough times for the night desk to learn their names. She said she kept waking up at 3:17 and hearing a woman whispering at the closet door, as if coaxing a child, come on please. And when she opened it, the twine would be still. She asked if she should cut it. I said no. I said leave it, and if you hear it tap twice, don't open the door. And she looked at me like a person looks at a weather forecast that calls the storm by name. I slept that night with my own closet, door shoved tight, the way you put a shoulder into a memory and hope it sticks. I've got one more, if you'll sit with me a little longer. In college, I cleaned the city museum at night to pay for books because the museum paid in cash and never asked if you were good at silence. Night museums are different rooms entirely. The dioramas go slack, the stuffed foxes look relieved to be caught forever mid-step, and the air has a dry linen closet smell of old paper, preservatives, and floor polish. You push your cart through dark galleries, hit your broom handles on door frames because the corridors were measured when people were smaller, and roll up elastic ropes as if you've been allowed to touch something sacred. The museum had a small room tucked behind the natural history wing that everyone called the folklore annex, a space crammed with artifacts from local logging camps and farm kitchens, quilt squares with names like Devil's Puzzle, jars of buttons that couldn't possibly all be needed, and an unlabeled wooden case with a glass front containing a taxidermied raven that looked like it knew the difference between a person and a shadow. There was also a new installation that brought in on loan from another institution, a traveling exhibit called American Night Houses, a series of miniature houses under glass, perfect replicas with cutaway walls showing bedrooms, kitchens, stairwells meant to show architectural styles across a century. The brochure bragged that every detail worked. Tiny lamps glowed, little kitchen clocks ticked, even the smallest doors had functioning hinges. It was cute in the day. At night, when the house lights were low, the tiny windows in the miniature houses gave off a faint Morthello glow like distant farmhouses seen through trees. I cleaned that room last because it made my neck tighten. It felt like being watched by many small faces. One night in November, the heating system coughed and then overcompensated, and the annex got too warm, almost sweaty. My breath fogged, oddly, even though the air wasn't cold, and I thought about how some buildings recycle the past like air. I was dusting the plexi over the night houses when I heard footsteps in the corridor, a slow walk-and-stop pattern like someone trying not to attract a guard's attention. I clicked off my little flashlight and listened. The footsteps paused outside the annex, and then, very gently, something tapped the glass on the raven's case from the inside. It was not the tick of the building settling or the pop of wood. It was a deliberate nail-tip tap, polite, the way you might touch glass to say, I see you. I told myself a janitor's lies, that the glass flexed in the heat, that a mouse hit it, that the sound traveled wrong in the plumbing. Then I heard a thrum like wings beating once, slow, inside a box. I risked the flashlight, quick sweep. The light caught the raven's glass and reflected my own narrow-eyed face back at me. But under my reflection, I saw the bird's head tilted slightly more toward me than before. The gleam of its glass bead, I like a wet seed. I backed into the night houses, because somehow the small houses felt safer, like many witnesses are better than one. The nearest model was a 1910 farmhouse, a shy little thing with a front porch and a parlor where a tiny upright piano sat under a landscape painting. The clock on the farmhouse mantel read to 13. My watch read to 13. I breathed out and my breath slid across the plexi like a grey glove. In that smear, the farmhouse's upstairs bedroom window glowed a trace brighter, enough for me to see a shape move behind the miniature curtain and stop. Someone had put shadow into a place shadow couldn't be unless it belonged there. I knelt, pressed my ear to the case. From inside the model, I heard a scrape of a small chair leg and then the smallest hinge squeal. The sound a dollhouse door would make if it needed oil. There's a part of your brain that flips like a coin when you confront something it cannot place. One side faces logic and the other faces the dark hill in the old stories. And whichever side lands up decides whether you run or look harder. I looked harder. The farmhouse's tiny front door opened a crack no thicker than a credit card. The parlor's miniature piano had 3 little brass pedals, and they depressed one after another with soft metallic pips as if a foot pressed them. Carefully, and then a note sounded, one thin, true piano note from inside the model. High and a little sour, the way old uprights go when the season changes. The sound came out of that tiny place the same way an odor would, crossing the glass, as if glass didn't argue with it. I did what you always do when something too small to be real becomes real. I spoke to it like it was a child. I said, "Hey," as softly as I could, and the upstairs curtain twitched once and then fell still as if a hand let go. I called the night guard with my walkie and said it was too warm in the annex, which was true, and could he check the HVAC so I could go mop the lobby while it cooled. The guard was new, a big guy who looked like he had been strong for a long time and didn't know how to be anything else. He came and stood in the doorway and immediately put his hands in his pockets, the way men do when they feel in church. He asked if I'd heard the thing, too. I said, "What thing?" And he described a tapping at the Raven case, then apologized like it was his fault for hearing it. He said last night on his rounds the Raven had been looking toward the door instead of toward the window painted on the backdrop, and that when he came back an hour later it had gone back to its display orientation, his words, not the museum's, and that he had put the former idea away because a guy like him doesn't talk about moving birds. We stood in the annex together like soldiers in a very small war. He wanted to laugh it off and couldn't find the laugh. I said, "Let's just do the thermostat," and he looked relieved at being given a task with screws and numbers dot behind. Us, inside the night houses, a lamp turned off in one model and turned on in another, a neat, tidy little transfer, as if someone had crossed from one house to the next, carrying a candle. The guard pressed his lips together, walked to the thermostat, and then the folklore annex's other caisson, old cedar chest, filled with quilts, released a breath like cedar and mothballs and something else. That sweet rot smell I recognized from places that keep what they should have let go. The guard whispered, "No, not to me, but to the room." He said it like it wasn't the first time, and shortly after, we both heard something that made my scalp sting. A soft little voice in the walls saying, "Mama," so quiet you could almost convince yourself it was pipes, except it had that pleading up tilt at the end people give to a word when they expect an answer. We did the cowardly brave thing, which is to walk at a normal pace out of the annex, down the corridor, and into the bright lobby, where the marble floor bounced your steps up into your knees. We sat on the edge of the fountain with the bronze herons and stared at a vending machine until our pulses calmed. He asked whether I thought it was kids messing with the dioramas. I wanted to say yes. I wanted the words to be as easy as that. We went back after 10 minutes because work waits. The annex had cooled. The Raven faced the painted window, a nice fake mountain view. The farmhouse's upstairs curtains hung neat and nobody pressed the piano pedals. The clock on the mantel read 2:26 and my watch read 2:31, which is right for clocks that only keep time when noticed. I finished the room fast and left the lights. A little brighter than the checklist allowed, and I didn't write it up. You don't write up whispers. The traveling exhibit went back to wherever traveling exhibits go in January. The annex felt flat without those little houses. The space they left behind was an absence the size of a detail. On the last night before it was crated, I lingered. I put my ear to the farmhouse one more time and heard nothing except the soft static of the empty. Then, as I stood to leave, the Raven's case fogged very faintly from the inside. A shape of breath on glass, one oval that would be about the size of a small child's face pressed close if it hadn't been the wrong height for a child. Higher, as if someone taller leaned down instead of up. I left the annex, wheeled my cart toward the back exit, and when the door let the winter air in, I smelled wood smoke and distant snow the way you only smell from a real night, not a kept one. If you're still with me after all that, we can keep going another time. There are more nights than sleeps, and some of them don't end when you lock the door. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. But remember, darkness has a way of finding those who seek it. Subscribe for more true horror stories, and until next time, keep your doors locked and your lights low. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend in the mountains. Liam wasn't the outdoorsy type, but after a relentless few months working as a software analyst in Chicago, he felt like he was suffocating. So when his co-worker, Marcus, suggested a secluded Airbnb deep in the Appalachian woods, he agreed without asking too many questions. Just us, no phones, no work, Marcus had said. Off-grid, for real, you'll thank me. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The place was more isolated than Liam expected. About 30 minutes off the main road on a narrow dirt path that wound through dense pine forest. There was no cell reception, and according to the listing, the nearest neighbor was half a mile away. The cabin itself was charming, if a bit worn. 2 stories, all wood, with a wraparound porch that creaked under their boots. The air smelled of moss and firewood. The silence was immediate and deep, pressing in from all sides. The first night was uneventful. They grilled steaks, played cards, drank too much whiskey. The silence outside was unsettling, but Liam chalked it up to being a city boy unaccustomed to a place where you could actually hear your own heartbeat. It wasn't until the second night that things started to feel ... off. They had just finished dinner and was sitting by the fire when Marcus got up to grab another beer. As he passed by the front window, he paused. "You see that?" he asked. Liam turned. "See what?" "I thought I saw someone standing out by the trees." Liam stood. Next to him, the porch light was on, casting a dull yellow circle into the woods. Beyond that, nothing but shadows. "I don't see anything," Liam said. Marcus stared a second longer, then shook his head. "Probably a deer or something." But his voice lacked conviction. That night, Liam couldn't sleep. Not because of what Marcus had said. He figured it really was just an animal, but because of the oppressive stillness outside. No wind, no insects, no night sounds at all. At around 3:12 a.m., He gave up trying to sleep and went downstairs for water. As he passed by the living room window, he froze. There, just at the edge of the tree line, far enough that the porch light barely reached, but close enough to sit, looked like a man. Not moving, just standing. He blinked, stepped closer to the glass. The figure was tall, thin, wearing something dark, maybe a hoodie or coat. No details, just an outline. But what disturbed Liam wasn't just the fact that someone was out there at 3 a.m. in the woods, it was that the figure didn't move, didn't shift weight, didn't pace, just stood. Liam's heartbeat hammered in his chest. 10 minutes or maybe only seconds passed, when he finally dared to glance at his phone, hoping. To check the time, there was nothing. The figure had vanished. He didn't wake Marcus. He didn't want to sound crazy. Instead, he told himself it was a trick of the eye. Maybe he was still half-dash asleep. The next morning, neither of them mentioned the night before. Liam wasn't even sure if Marcus had seen anything else. They ate breakfast in silence. The coffee tasted burnt, the eggs overcooked. Everything felt a little wrong around noon. They decided to hike a trail they'd seen on the map. It started just behind the cabin and looped around the back ridge. The air was colder than it had been the day before, and Liam noticed that the deeper they walked into the forest, the quieter it got. About 20 minutes in, they stumbled upon something hanging from a tree. A wind chime, made from animal bones and twine, swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. Marcus laughed nervously. Some hiker's idea of a joke. But there were no signs of recent human activity, no footprints, no wrappers, no tire tracks on the narrow trail, and the twine looked old, brittle, as if it had been there for years. That night, they didn't joke or drink. Liam brought up the figure he'd seen at 3 a.m. Marcus went pale. "I saw him too," he whispered. "Same place." I didn't want to say anything. They decided to stay inside, lock the doors, keep the lights low. It was supposed to make them feel safer. It didn't. At 2:46 a.m., the power went out. Not with a bang, no storm, no flicker. Just total blackout. 1 second everything was normal. The next, darkness swallowed the house. Liam grabbed his phone. No signal. He turned on a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. That's when they heard it scratching. Slow, deliberate, right against the wall outside. Not like an animal. Too slow, too human. Marcus motioned for him to stay quiet. They crept to the living room window. The porch light, which should have been out, along with the power, was still on, and the man was back, closer. Now, standing on the porch, not 5 feet from the window, still, silent, head tilted slightly, as if listening. But the part that made Liam's blood turn to ice was that the figure's face was completely obscured. Not by shadow, by something else. A sack, rough fabric, holes where the eyes should be. The man reached out, not at them, at the window frame, fingers curling slightly against the wood. Testing it, Liam grabbed Marcus's arm and pulled him back. They didn't breathe. After a few minutes, the scratching stopped. When they checked again, the man was gone. Carved into the wood of the porch, right below the window, were 5 long, thin scratches, like something had been marking the cabin, like a warning or a signature. The scratches on the porch gnawed at Liam's mind all morning. Every time he glanced toward the window, he felt as if the dark shape was still watching. Marcus tried to joke, but the laughter died quickly, replaced by the same quiet unease that had clung to the cabin since their arrival. They spent the day cautiously exploring the area near the cabin, The forest was dense, almost claustrophobic, and the further they walked from the dirt path, the heavier the air felt. Liam's city-trained eyes noticed every shadow, every movement, flicker of wind through the branches, the distant rustle of unseen animals. Maybe it's just a local hunter, Marcus suggested as they returned, carrying a few scattered firewood, logs, some guy pulling pranks. Or maybe it's a deer like you said before. Liam didn't respond. He wanted to believe it. He needed to. But the scratches, the faceless figure, the silent testing at the window, none of it matched. A deer. That night, they tried to sleep with the lights on, the curtains drawn. Liam kept a baseball bat beside the bed, gripping it tightly every time he heard the wind or what he thought was the wind against the cabin. Marcus tried to distract himself with a book, but his eyes kept flicking toward the shadows on the wall. At exactly 2:48 a.m., a slow creaking sound came from above. Liam froze. Footsteps, light, deliberate, moving across the wooden floor of the second story. They weren't theirs. The cabin only had the one set of stairs, and no one was upstairs. "Did you hear that?" Liam whispered. Marcus nodded, pale. "Yeah, I think it's coming from the attic." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The attic had a narrow trap door above the kitchen ceiling. They had inspected it earlier, but it had been locked, trusted hinges, untouched for years. Now, the sound above seemed to mock them, like someone moving carefully but confidently, exploring the space as if it were their own. They grabbed flashlights and carefully climbed the stairs. Every creak made them jump. At the top, the door to the attic was slightly ajar. The darkness beyond it seemed thicker than the rest of the night. Liam's stomach twisted. Marcus swallowed hard. "Do we open it?" Liam shook his head. "No. We watch." They inched forward, pressing against the wall to stay out of view. A pale hand or something that looked like Oni merged from the attic doorway, testing the threshold. Then, slowly, a faceless head appeared, tilting just like the figure from the porch. Liam's breath caught. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream, but the figure didn't move further. It lingered there, silent, observing, before retreating into the shadows above. And then, nothing. The scratching returned this time from the attic door. Long, deliberate marks across the wood, as if the being were engraving something. Liam and Marcus exchanged a look of terror. These weren't random scratches. They were messages, warnings. The next morning, Liam tried to rationalize. Maybe someone had broken in while they slept. Maybe the cabin had been used by squatters, but no tracks led to the door. No footprints outside. No other signs of human presence. And the scratches on the porch had not changed. In desperation, Marcus suggested leaving, but Liam argued for staying one more night. "We can't just leave," he said. "We need to know what's happening here. If it follows us into the woods, there's no getting away." Reluctantly, they agreed. They fortified the doors, moved heavy furniture against the windows, and even set up a few cameras inside the cabin. The digital displays would show every movement while they tried to sleep. That night, the cabin was colder than usual. Liam lay awake, listening. At 3:03 a.m., his ears caught a low, dragging sound coming from the floorboards beneath him. Not outside, not above. Beneath, the cameras flickered on and off. A dull static hummed through the monitors. Liam got up, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. Marcus followed. They moved toward the living room. The porch light outside, the one that had been inexplicably on the previous night, was now off. But in its place, there were footprints. Large, elongated, without a clear heel or toe structure. They led from the edge of the woods to the porch, then disappeared into the darkness. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Marcus stepped back. "Those weren't here before," he whispered. Liam nodded. "We're not alone. And this thing, it's learning us, watching us, figuring us out." Suddenly, the scratching returned, this time from the wall beside the couch. The sound wasn't just slow, had a rhythm. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. Liam's skin crawled. The pattern was deliberate, almost like code. They listened, frozen. Then, it stopped. Minutes passed. Nothing Liam was about to suggest. They barricade themselves in the bedroom when a shadow moved across the ceiling. It was faint, almost imperceptible. But there, something crawling above, high enough that the flashlight couldn't reach. Something moving across the rafters. Marcus whispered, "We need to leave. Now." Before Liam could answer, the front door slammed open. The wind, impossible. The night was still. The door didn't just move, it had been forced outward. Something had been testing it. Invading their space, they sprinted outside, freezing in the crisp mountain air. The forest seemed alive, the trees swaying though the air was calm. And there, at the edge of the tree line, stood the figure. Faceless, silent, perfectly still. It didn't advance, it didn't retreat, just watched. Then it raised one arm, slowly, deliberately, a signal, a warning. Liam didn't wait to find. Out he and Marcus ran down the path, hearts pounding, lungs burning. They reached the car miraculously, still parked in the tiny clearing where they'd left it. They fumbled with the keys, jumped inside, and drove down the dirt path without looking back, even with the headlights on. The trees seemed to shift unnaturally, shadows stretching longer than they should. Every bend in the path, Liam swore he saw the figure standing deeper in the woods, always observing, always silent. When they finally reached the main road, the figure was gone. The night returned to normal silence. The forest, the cabin, the scratches, they were all behind them, or so they thought. The next day, Liam tried to rationalize everything. Exhaustion, cabin fever, hallucinations from the isolation. But when he checked the footage from the cameras, the truth made his blood run cold. Every camera had captured movement. Every shadow in the house was wrong. The figure had been inside, moving silently between rooms, appearing and disappearing in ways that defied logic. At one point, the living room camera showed it standing directly behind Marcus while he slept faceless, observing, waiting, and then the footage ended. No warning, no crash, just gone. They returned to the cabin the following weekend. This time during the day, under the bright sun, everything seemed normal. The porch was intact, the trail clear, the wind chime gone. But when Liam placed his hand on the porch railing, the 5 scratches were faintly visible beneath the paint. He didn't need to see the figure to know it had never left, and in the back of his mind, he realized the worst part. It wasn't just the cabin the figure could follow. It had learned, observed, and now it was patient. Part 2 ends with heightened suspense. The figure is still a threat, can move unnaturally, and Liam and Marcus now realize the danger is far from over. If you're ready, I can start part 3, the final part, keeping all prior events consistent and building to the climax. Days passed, but sleep eluded Liam. Every creak in his apartment, every shadow cast by the streetlights outside, triggered flashes of that faceless figure. Marcus refused to answer his calls. The last conversation had been terse, shaking with fear, and he had hung up abruptly, muttering that he needed time to think. Liam didn't blame him. He himself could barely think straight. The scratches, the wind chime, the attic, the porch, every detail gnawed at him, replaying endlessly in his mind. He tried to convince himself it was over, that driving away from the cabin had broken whatever hold the figure had on them, but deep down, he knew better. On the 5th night after returning to the city, Liam awoke to a sound that froze him mid-breath. 3 slow knocks on his apartment door, not at the usual pace of someone knocking, but methodical, deliberate, the same rhythm as the scratching he had heard in the cabin. His chest tightened. His hands trembled as he grabbed the baseball bat he kept under his bed. He peered through the peephole. Nothing. Empty hallway. The fluorescent light flickered, buzzing like an old neon sign. He exhaled slowly, telling himself it was a prank. A neighbor, but his apartment building was quiet. No one knew he had been in the woods. No one knew about the cabin. He turned from the door, and then movement. A shadow across the living room wall, stretching unnaturally, crawling like liquid. Across the paint, Liam swung the bat, but it met only empty air. The shadow recoiled, twisted, and then vanished. He backed into the corner, eyes darting, listening. His phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. No signature, no explanation. Just those words. The lights flickered again, this time accompanied by a low scratching sound on the floorboards beneath him. He backed up toward the kitchen, heart hammering. The sound moved, following him, circling, almost sentient. Then silence. He didn't dare sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his chair, bat in hand, flashlight on, scanning every corner of the apartment. The shadows seemed thicker than usual, edges curling unnaturally, as if they had weight by morning. Exhaustion nearly overtook him. He didn't dare look outside the window, but he felt the same oppressive gaze he had felt in the cabin. It was patient, waiting. Days turned into a week. Liam left his apartment only for essentials, avoiding contact. He didn't call Marcus again. His mind, already fraying, began to fill in the gaps. The scratches on the cabin porch, they weren't random. The faceless figure was marking, observing, planning, and now it had followed him across miles, across the safety of city streets. One night, as he stared at the ceiling, he heard the scratching from above, the sound of someone walking on the roof. Impossible. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. The building was old, but not that old. The sound circled above him, moving across the ceiling, sometimes stopping, right above his head. Then the whisper came, barely audible at first, low and rasping. Liam's blood ran cold. He dropped the bat. It clattered to the floor. The whisper grew louder, merging with the sound of the floorboards, the shadows on the walls. His apartment, the place he thought safe, felt like the cabin all over again. The next morning, he called a locksmith to install additional locks and deadbolts. He reinforced windows, sealed gaps. But as he did, he noticed small scratches forming. On the doorframe, thin, elongated marks identical to those on the cabin porch. The figure had been inside while he reinforced his security. How? When? Impossible. Liam decided he had to return to the cabin. He needed answers. He needed to confront whatever it was. But the thought filled him with dread. He couldn't ignore the figure. It had learned patience, and it was methodical. It was waiting for him to act. Packing quickly, He drove the long stretch of highway back into the Appalachian woods. As he neared the cabin, the familiar dirt path twisted unnaturally. Trees that had stood straight before now leaned toward the road, branches curling like fingers. Shadows pooled unnaturally beneath them. He stopped. The air was unnervingly still. No wind, no bird calls. Even the distant sound of a stream seemed absent. The forest itself felt alive, aware. Liam approached the cabin cautiously. The porch was empty. The 5 scratches were faintly visible. The wind chime gone. The door to the attic locked. Everything appeared normal. Too normal. He stepped. Inside, Marcus wasn't there. Nothing moved. Yet he felt the oppressive presence immediately, the same weight. The same gaze that had haunted him for weeks. Hours passed as he scoured the cabin, searching for clues. Every corner, every floorboard, every attic step creaked under his cautious steps. And then, in the corner of the living room, he saw it. A small pile of twine, shaped into a triangle, the same symbol he had noticed before. A whisper curled round him, almost inaudible. The shadows deepened. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement, fluid, impossible. It darted across the walls, merging into the corners. The figure had returned. Not just a shape outside anymore, it was here, inside, moving in ways that defied logic. Liam backed toward the door. The triangle of twine seemed to pulse, glowing faintly, casting twisted shadows across the walls. He grabbed the bat. Then, the attic door creaked open slowly. No footsteps this time, no scratching. Just the door, swaying slightly, from above. A voice garbled, distorted, like metal scraping against metal emerged. The floor beneath him trembled. The shadows pulled, stretching toward him, coiling like smoke. The temperature dropped. His breath fogged in the air. And then he saw it. Faceless, standing at the top of the stairs, head tilted, arms raised slowly. Liam swung the bat. Nothing. The figure flickered, half visible, half gone. It whispered, low and endless. The lights exploded in static bursts. The shadows merged. Then, silence. Liam awoke outside the cabin, dawn breaking. He was sprawled on the forest floor, bat gone. No scratches visible, no twine triangles. The cabin looked normal. The trees, the path, the air, everything calm. Yet deep in his chest, he knew it was only a momentary pause. Weeks later, news articles mentioned a missing camper near the Appalachian woods. Authorities found nothing, no sign of struggle, only footprints that led in circles and ended abruptly. Liam's disappearance was noted, but most assumed he had wandered off and gotten lost. He never returned home, never contacted anyone, and the last time anyone saw him, he was walking toward the forest, eyes wide, muttering, "Don't knock, not even once. Especially not 3 times. Because some doors, some figures, some shadows, they are patient, they wait, they watch. And once noticed, once acknowledged, they will follow." Always, the forest swallowed him that day. And those who dare enter, who hear the whispers, who see the faceless figure know this. The woods keep their secrets. They never let go. The summer of 1997 was the kind of summer that seemed endless. Heat rolled off the asphalt highways in shimmering waves. The radio stations played the same grunge hits on repeat. And the night air, carried the smell of cut grass and gasoline. For friends Mark, Alyssa, Ryan, and Jessica were heading out of town for a weekend trip. They had just graduated high school, and the future felt like a wide open road. College, jobs, responsibilities, all of that could wait. For now, they had one more summer night to live like kids. Mark was driving his old Chevy Blazer, a beat-up SUV that smelled faintly of motor oil and cigarette smoke. The windows were rolled down, the music blaring, and the cooler in the back was loaded with cheap beer. Alyssa, sitting in the passenger seat, had her bare feet on the dashboard, painting her toenails in the fading sunlight. Blackwater's only 2 hours from here, she said, squinting at the worn map she held. They've got this lake where people used to party all summer. Bonfires, swimming, the whole thing. My cousin swears it's like the spot. Ryan, sitting behind Mark, laughed. Yeah, if your cousin was here 20 years ago. Doesn't sound like much is going on now. Exactly, Jessica chimed in. She leaned her head against the window, her blonde hair whipping in the wind. That's the point. No crowds, no cops, just us. The idea was simple. Drive out to Blackwater Lake, camp overnight, and head back before their parents noticed. But Blackwater carried stories, the kind of whispered tales that older kids told around bonfires just to scare the younger ones. Tales of missing campers, a ghostly figure in the woods, and a masked man who supposedly haunted the lake. Of course, none of them believed it. The drive stretched into twilight. Cornfields gave way to dense pine forests, and the 2-lane highway grew emptier with every mile. A faded sign flashed past. The town looked frozen in time. Gas stations with peeling paint, a shuttered movie theater, a diner with only 2 cars in the lot. As they drove through Main Street, the locals turned their heads to watch, their expressions unreadable. Creepy, Ryan muttered. It's like we just drove into a Stephen King novel. Mark grinned. Relax. Every small town looks creepy when you don't know anyone. Still, there was something unsettling. A sheriff's patrol car idled near the diner, the deputy inside following them with cold eyes. For a moment, Mark thought about turning round, but then the town gave way to the tree-lined road that led to Blackwater Lake. By the time they reached the lake, the sun had set. The water stretched out like a black mirror, reflecting the sliver of moon. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass, and the distant hoot of an owl echoed across the trees. This is perfect, Alyssa whispered. They set up their small camp on the shore, a couple of sleeping bags, a cooler, and a battery-powered lantern. The silence was thick, broken only by the crack of a beer can or the rustle of branches in the breeze. Jessica tossed a pebble into the lake. So, anyone want to tell the story? Ryan smirked. Which one? The guy with the hook hand, or the one about the drowned girl who pulls you under? No, Alyssa said, her voice serious. The Blackwater story. They all looked at her. You've heard it, right? They say a man nobody knows his name used to live out here in the woods. A hunter or a trapper, something like that. Supposedly, he went crazy after his family died. One night, a group of teenagers came out here to party, and he slaughtered them, left their bodies in the woods. The cops found pieces of them nailed to trees. Jessica shivered. Gross. That's just an urban legend, maybe. Alyssa took a sip of her beer, but they never caught him. And some people say he's still out here, waiting. Mark laughed, though it sounded a little forced. You've been watching too many late-night horror movies. But despite the jokes, a tension settled over them. The The woods seemed darker now, the sounds sharper. Every crack of a twig made them glance over their shoulders, around midnight. Mark and Jessica wandered off down a dirt trail, leaving Ryan and Alyssa by the fire. The woods swallowed the pair quickly, their flashlight beam bobbing between the trees. "Where are you taking me?" Jessica whispered. "Relax," Mark grinned. "I just want to check out the old cabin I read about online. Supposedly, it's still standing near the ridge." They walked for 10 minutes, the air growing cooler, the trees pressing in. And then, through the branches, they saw it. A cabin, rotting and half collapsed, its roof sagging, windows broken. "This place is straight out of a horror movie," Jessica muttered. Mark stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning under his weight. "Come on, let's take a look." Jessica hesitated, but followed. Inside, the cabin smelled of mildew and something else, something metallic. Rusted tools hung on the walls, and in the corner sat an old hunting chair. But what made Jessica's stomach drop was the axe. It was buried in the floorboards, as if someone had swung it down and left it there. "Okay," Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "Let's go back now." Mark nodded, his bravado fading. They turned to leave when a sound stopped them cold. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching in the dirt outside. Jessica's heart hammered. She grabbed Mark's arm, eyes wide. "Maybe it's Ryan messing with us," Mark whispered, though he didn't sound convinced. The footsteps drew closer. A shadow fell across the broken window, and then silence. Jessica held her breath. The door creaked, and standing in the doorway was a figure tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a cracked white mask that gleamed in the moonlight. The axe was no longer. In the floor, Jessica screamed. Mark grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back door, but the masked man moved fast, impossibly fast. The axe came down, splintering the wood just inches from Mark's shoulder. They bolted into the trees, branches slashing at their skin, lungs burning. Behind them, they could hear him steady, relentless, the axe dragging across rocks. By the time they stumbled back into camp, Alyssa and Ryan were on their feet, alarmed. "What the hell happened?" Ryan shouted. "Run," Jessica gasped. "Someone's out there." But it was too late. From the darkness beyond the firelight, the masked man stepped into view. The axe gleamed red in the lantern glow. The night in Blackwater had only just begun. The sight of the masked man standing at the edge of their campfire froze them in place. No one moved. No one even breathed. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the faint chorus of frogs by the lake, broken by the metallic scrape of the axe dragging along the ground. Jessica's nails dug deep into Mark's arm, her entire body trembling. Alyssa blinked, rapidly as if trying to convince herself that this wasn't real, while Ryan, caught between panic and anger, snatched up an empty beer bottle and hurled it toward the figure. The glass shattered against the man's chest and rained shards across the dirt, but he didn't flinch. He stood there, towering, his cracked white mask reflecting the lantern's glow, completely unfazed. "Car, now," Mark shouted, his voice breaking. That single word was enough. They ran, the camp scattered into chaos, sleeping bags and cans crushed underfoot as they bolted toward the tree line where the Chevy Blazer sat waiting like salvation. Jessica was the first to reach it, her hands slipping on the handle, breath coming in ragged gasps. Alyssa stumbled behind her, tears streaming down her face. Mark fumbled in his pocket for the keys, his fingers slick with sweat. Ryan glanced back and swore. The masked man had already moved. He was no longer by the fire. He was closer. Too close. "Mark, hurry the fuck up." Ryan screamed. The keys clattered to the dirt. Mark dropped to his knees, scrambling, his heart hammering so hard he thought it would burst. Jessica yanked open the passenger door and dove inside, Alyssa following. Ryan grabbed Mark by the back of his shirt and dragged him up just as the axe whistled through the air and buried itself in the car door with a sickening crunch. Metal shrieked. The Blazer rocked from the impact. Mark shoved himself into the driver's seat, twisting the ignition with shaking hands. The engine coughed, then roared to life. Ryan slammed the back door shut, screaming for him to drive. The tires spun in the dirt before catching, the SUV lurching forward violently. Behind them, the masked man pulled his axe free and began walking after them. Each step deliberate, unhurried, as though he already knew where they were headed. Mark gunned the engine, the Blazer bouncing over ruts and branches as it tore down the dark trail. Trees whipped past on either side, headlights cutting narrow beams through the woods. Jessica was sobbing uncontrollably in the passenger seat, Alyssa clutching her arm with white-knuckled terror. What the hell was that? Ryan shouted from the back, his voice raw. "I don't know," Mark barked, his hands locked tight on the wheel. "I don't fucking know. No one's out here," Jessica screamed. "Nobody's supposed to be out here." Mark's stomach twisted. She was right. That mask, that axe, that cabinet was all wrong. It felt like they had stepped into someone else's nightmare, and now it was chasing them. They burst out of the woods onto the narrow two-lane road leading back into town. The Blazer swerved dangerously before Mark straightened it out. The road was empty, nothing but dark trees and the occasional road sign flashing past. "Where are we going?" Alyssa whispered, her voice hoarse. "Back to town," Mark said. "Sheriff's office, anywhere with people." "Do you think he's following us?" Mark didn't answer. They didn't see another car for miles. Blackwater was silent, dead, its streets lined with closed shops and dark houses. When they finally pulled up in front of the sheriff's office, the clock on the dash read 12:47 a.m. The small brick building sat under a flickering streetlight. The American flag outside unmoving in the still night air. Mark killed the engine. Nobody moved. "Come on," Ryan said, his voice low. "We need help." Inside, the office was dim, lit only by a single desk lamp. A tired-looking deputy sat behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. He looked up slowly as they burst through the door, wild-eyed and breathless. "What's the emergency?" he asked flatly. There's a man," Jessica stammered. "Out by the lake, he tried to kill us. He had an axe, he's still out there." The deputy didn't even blink. He set his magazine down, leaned back in his chair, and sighed. "You kids been drinking tonight?" "What? No," Mark shouted. "I mean, yeah, a couple beers. But that's not the point. There's a fucking psycho in the woods." The deputy's expression hardened. "Watch your language, son." Ryan stepped forward, fists clenched. "Did you not hear us? A guy in a mask tried to hack us up." The deputy's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall, then back to them. "Lake's off limits after dark. Been that way for years. Signs are posted clear as day. You shouldn't have been out there." Alyssa shook her head in disbelief. "Are you kidding me? You think we made this up?" The deputy stood, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered pistol. "Go home, get some sleep. I don't want to see you out by that lake again, understand?" Before anyone could respond, The radio on his desk crackled to life. A voice came through, distorted and urgent. Unit 3, we've got a situation out by Miller's Woods. Caller reports. Screams. Possible disturbance. The deputy's jaw tightened. He picked up the receiver, muttering something low, then grabbed his hat. He glanced at the group, his eyes cold. "Stay put," he ordered, then walked out into the night through the office window. They watched the patrol car pull out onto Main Street, its red and blue lights flashing silently in the dark. Jessica hugged herself, trembling. "He doesn't believe us." "He doesn't have to believe us," Mark said. "He's about to see for himself." But deep down, none of them were sure, because if the stories were true, the sheriff wasn't going to find the killer. The killer was going to find him. The sheriff's car disappeared into the night, the fading red and blue lights swallowed by the trees. Inside the office, silence pressed in heavy and suffocating. Jessica paced the floor, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, while Alyssa sat in one of the hard wooden chairs, staring blankly at the desk lamp's halo. Mark leaned against the wall, head tilted back, breathing hard through his nose. Ryan kept glancing at the door, as if expecting the masked man to follow them straight into town. Minutes crawled by, each tick of the wall clock scraping at their nerves. Finally, Ryan snapped. "Screw this, we can't just sit here. That psycho could be right behind us." "And go where?" Alyssa asked, her voice hollow. "Anywhere," Ryan hissed. "Back on the road, to another town, doesn't matter. We just have to move." Mark rubbed his eyes. He wanted to believe they were safe here, that the deputy would come back with backup, that adults would finally take over and fix everything. But deep down, a knot of dread twisted tighter with each passing second. The stories Alyssa had told by the fire came back to him, about kids vanishing, about pieces of them found in the woods. If those stories were true, then the people of Blackwater had known about this for years. Maybe they even accepted it. Maybe that's why the deputy had been so calm. Before he could say any of this, the radio on the desk crackled again. A burst of static, then a garbled voice. "Unit 3. Do you copy? Blood everywhere." Oh God, the transmission cut off with a sharp squeal. Jessica froze mid-step. Alyssa's eyes darted to Mark. Ryan moved first, snatching the radio microphone. "Hello, hello, what happened?" Only static answered. Mark's blood ran cold. He knew, somehow he knew that Sheriff was already gone. Jessica shook her head violently. "No, no, 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 we can't stay here. We can't." The lights went out. The lamp, the overhead bulb, even the glow from the hallway, all gone in an instant. The room was drowned in darkness, the silence shattered only by Jessica's choked sob. Then came the sound. From outside, slow, deliberate footsteps on gravel. Ryan lunged toward the door, fumbling for the lock. Mark grabbed his arm. "Don't." The door rattled. A heavy thud shook the frame. Alyssa screamed. The lock clicked, as if it had been toyed with from the outside. "Back, everyone, back," Mark shouted. They stumbled away just as the door burst inward, the wood splintering. He was there. The mask gleamed faintly in the moonlight spilling through. The doorway, the axe, gripped firmly in his hands. He stepped inside, dragging the blade across the floor, the sound shrieking against the tiles. Ryan grabbed a chair and hurled it at him. The man swatted it aside with terrifying ease. The four of them scattered. Jessica diving behind the counter, Alyssa pressed against the wall, Ryan and Mark circling toward the back hall. "Run," Mark yelled. They bolted down the narrow corridor, past closed office doors, the echo of boots. Behind them, like a countdown to death. At the end of the hall was a metal door. Mark shoved it open and they spilled into the night air. Lungs burning. The alley behind the station was narrow, lit only by a buzzing neon sign from the diner across the street. They sprinted toward the car, hearts slamming in their chests. Jessica was already fumbling with the passenger handle when Mark's stomach sank. The tires were slashed. All four of them. Ryan cursed so loudly it echoed down the street. "We're screwed, Dinah." Alyssa pointed, tears streaking her face. "Go." They ran across Main Street, the town utterly deserted, as though every window was watching, but no one dared intervene. The diner door banged open under Ryan's shove. The smell of stale grease and coffee hung in the air. Empty booths lined the walls, a jukebox humming faintly in the corner. Mark shoved tables against the door. Jessica collapsed into a booth, sobbing into her hands. Alyssa leaned against the counter, shaking uncontrollably. Ryan stalked back and forth like a caged animal. "We can't keep running. He'll just keep coming. He's not even tired. He's not even human." "He's human," Mark said through gritted teeth. "He bleeds. He has to." As if on cue, a shadow passed across the diner windows. The mask appeared at the glass, staring, and Jessica screamed and ducked under the table. Ryan grabbed a steak knife from the counter, his hands trembling but eyes burning with fury. "Then we kill him before he kills us." The glass shattered. The axe crashed through the window, spraying shards across the floor. The man climbed in with a slow, methodical grace, as though the world itself belonged to him. Ryan charged. With a roar, he drove the knife toward the man's chest. For a moment, hope flared in Mark's chest, but the killer caught Ryan's wrist mid-strike, twisting it until the bone cracked. Ryan screamed, dropping to his knees. "Ryan," Alyssa cried. The axe came down. Mark didn't see the blow, only heard its sickening thud, the wet sound of finality. Blood sprayed across the linoleum. Alyssa screamed until her voice broke. Jessica's body shook violently under the booth, muffled sobs tearing through her throat. Mark's vision tunneled. There was no time to grieve, no time to think. He grabbed the hot coffee pot from behind the counter and flung it. Boiling liquid and shattered glass exploded against the mask, making the killer reel back for the first time. "Move," Mark roared. He yanked Alyssa by the wrist, dragging her toward the kitchen. Jessica scrambled after them, face pale and streaked with tears. They burst through the swinging doors into a maze of stainless steel counters and humming refrigerators. The back door loomed ahead. Mark slammed into it, shoulder first, the rusted latch snapping. They spilled out into the alley behind the diner. A faint glow caught his Aja payphone by the corner. "Call for help," Mark shouted. Alyssa sprinted for it, fumbling coins into the slot with shaking hands. She pressed the receiver to her ear. "Hello, hello, please, we need help. Blackwater Diner, he's killing us." Her words dissolved into a shriek. Behind her, the masked man emerged from the shadows. The axe arced. The payphone receiver swung wildly. Alyssa's scream cut short in an instant. Jessica collapsed, retching. Mark stood frozen, the world tilting violently around him. 3 gone. Just him and Jessica now. The killer turned, the mask glinting, and Mark saw his own reflection in its cracked surface more. Terrified, utterly insignificant, something inside him snapped. "No more running," he whispered. He grabbed a loose metal pipe from the alley floor and swung it with everything he had. The impact rang like a bell, sending the killer staggering. Mark swung again and again, screaming with rage, with grief, with raw survival. The axe clattered to the ground. Jessica, the axe. She stumbled forward, hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it, but she managed to lift the bloodied weapon. For a moment, the killer was on his knees, mask tilted down. Mark's chest heaved. This was it. This was their only chance. Jessica raised the axe. Her arms trembled. She hesitated. The killer moved, faster than he should have been able to. He caught her by the throat, lifting her off the ground effortlessly. Her feet kicked helplessly, the axe slipping from her grip. Jessica, Mark screamed. In that split second, instinct took over. He rammed the pipe through the mask's eye socket, with all the force left in his body. The crack of bone echoed off the alley walls. The killer dropped Jessica, his hands clawing at his face. A guttural sound escaped him, more animal than human. Mark didn't wait. He grabbed Jessica, dragging her to her feet, and together they ran stumbling through the alley into the open road. Behind them, the figure swayed, blood pouring through the mask's cracks. He staggered a step, then another, before collapsing into the shadows. Mark and Jessica didn't stop running until the first hint of dawn painted the sky. They collapsed on the side of the highway, breathless, broken, alive. In the distance, a siren wailed, "Help," finally. But when Mark looked back toward the town of Blackwater, he knew, somewhere in those woods, behind one of those dark windows, the mask would be waiting, and the story wasn't over.